Welcome to our latest edition of our Tips and Tricks series. In this episode, we will discuss the important subject of metrics. I've had numerous conversations around this topic over the past year or so, and it is apparent that people are struggling a bit in this area. What should I measure? How should I present the data? How much data should I show? These are just some of the questions I have heard. These questions often come up when we discuss the topic in the context of office and service processes. After all, process measurement is a relatively new concept in many such environments. Further, I have also seen some approaches that concern me. These are best described as an attempt to achieve some form of one-size-fits-all approach. I will discuss this towards the end of the episode. So let's get started. As I mentioned, I believe that this is a very important subject. We want people to be data and fact-driven in their problem-solving, process improvement, and process management efforts. In fact, the use of data is part of every stage of Deming's Plan, Do, Check, Act, or PDCA improvement cycle, as well as the myriad improvement methodologies that derive from it. First, we need data to help us fully and more objectively understand current conditions, which is typically part of the plan stage of PDCA. Some of that will be part of a study to grasp current conditions. By study, I mean that data that will be collected for a limited time only, not as part of ongoing process management. The intent of this episode is to address the latter, ongoing process management. Towards the end of the episode, I will talk briefly about distinguishing between data as part of a study from data collected to monitor and continuously improve a process. Of course, once a process change has been deliberately made, its effects must be assessed. This is accomplished in the check stage that follows the do stage in the PDCA cycle. Once again, we want to objectively assess the changes. Data will certainly help. Based on the data, it may be determined that different process changes will be necessary. Back to the plan stage, as the changes made did not have the desired effect. If they did have the desired effect, then it will be necessary to fully act to make standard, the A of PDCA. Deming referred to the need for a control plan as part of the act stage. Methods must be put in place that ensure that effective process changes are sustained over time. Ongoing process measurement is part of most every control plan. The measurement system not only monitors the process, it can also identify additional opportunities to improve it, thus repeating the PDCA cycle again and again. In other words, the process measurement system will enable the practice of continuous improvement over time, the true goal of Lean. Of course, the process measurement system alone is insufficient to practice continuous improvement. Time to discuss and interpret the metrics as a team, as well as time to follow up on the ideas for improvement, must be provided. Methodologies, some variation of PDCA, and tools must be provided to practice CI as well. But as the expression goes, out of sight, out of mind. An effective process measurement system can keep everyone's eye on the ball on the health of a process, a value stream, and even an entire enterprise. But what to measure? Consider this acronym as a starter set, SQDCE. S is for safety, Q for quality, D for delivery, C for cost, and E for engagement. Organizations in many industries have been using SQDC as a framework for process measurement for decades now. The fifth element, engagement, has been more recently added. The specific metrics within each category will vary based on the nature of the process as well as the need of the stakeholders of the process, including its customers. And customers here can be both internal and external to the organization. For example, a measure of quality in manufacturing may take the form of rejects, scrap, rework, and the like. But what is quality for an invoice process, say? Perhaps invoice errors or adjustments would be an appropriate metric. For delivery, which is really a service metric, on-time shipment on an order and/or a line item basis is commonly used in manufacturing and distribution operations. In a project environment, such as engineering or information technologies, one might use a metric of on-time completion of tasks to a project plan. In a call center, it might be various metrics such as queue wait time, drop calls, and similar measures. Cost in a manufacturing environment might include components of labor and materials. In a service environment, some form of hours to deliver the service may be appropriate. The point is, we must be flexible and often a bit creative. Sometimes we must think through what SQDCE means to a particular process for which we want to develop a process measurement system. For a hiring process, for a purchasing process, it is not always readily apparent, but be assured a discussion with the right people will get you there. Plus, we have an important tip that can really help coming up next. What I have found to be very helpful, particularly when I am dealing with processes that I have no prior experience in, is to create a SIPOC. SIPOC is an acronym. S is for suppliers, I is for inputs, P for process or processes, O is for outputs, and C is for customers. It is a nice little exercise that can help you get your head around a process and how you might want to measure it. The simplified example in this slide lists 3 different accounting-related processes: check credit, invoice, receive cash. These are listed in the center under processes. The outputs for each process and the customers, internal or external, who use or consume the outputs are then identified. These are listed on the right side. On the left side, the inputs that each process needs in order to perform the process are listed, as well as the suppliers, internal or external, who provide the inputs. Again, this is a simplified example just to give you the idea. Here's how it works. Begin in the middle column. You can list out several processes that a department or a group within a department performs. You can also list out the steps of a single process if you want to focus on just one. Then for each process or step, you will ask a series of questions. First, what are the outputs from the process or step? List those out in the appropriate column. Next, ask, who are the internal or external customers to the process who make use of the outputs? Now here's where it gets interesting. Ask, what do the customers feel is important about those outputs? If you are not sure, simply ask them. Now consider applying SQDCE here. Ask them what is really important from a quality standpoint. What are acceptable or unacceptable characteristics about the outputs? Quality metrics such as returns, complaints, and the like are commonly used. Safety might be important to a customer, particularly in a service environment. Think patient safety in healthcare. What is important to the customer in terms of delivery or service? We mentioned on-time delivery, often found in manufacturing, distribution, and some service environments, as a metric earlier in the episode. But there can be others that are more appropriate, such as speed of service or some other measure of responsiveness. How about cost? Customers typically are willing to pay a certain amount for goods and services. We might want to track the cost of delivering the goods or services. After all, the cost often dictates the price that an organization can offer to its customers. In some situations, we might want to track lost opportunities due to pricing. Even a form of engagement can be measured with regard to customers. Customer satisfaction is a common measure and quite easy to obtain these days. Everyone is sending out follow-up surveys in all industries. Net promoter scores are a measure of engagement. The result of this discussion is a nice set of what we call outcome metrics. Processes to collect these at some frequency can then be developed, but more is necessary. As we will soon discuss, outcome metrics alone are insufficient. We should also consider process metrics. Ask what process characteristics affect the outputs. What should we measure in terms of process characteristics? Again, consider SQDCE. Unsafe behaviors observed in the process is a common measure. Unfortunately, most organizations simply measure accidents and/or lost time, usually in days due to injury. These are very much outcome metrics. Unsafe behaviors are process metrics. Again, more discussion on the difference between the two is coming up next in this episode. For now, think of process metrics as leading indicators to outcome metrics. Are there in-process quality metrics that can be measured? Measures of equipment condition might be indicators of product quality. Lead time to perform a process is often an indicator of outcome quality. In healthcare, for example, the lead time to perform a procedure can affect negatively or positively infection rates, readmission rates, and the like. In-process rework, scrap, and similar can serve as cost-related metrics. They represent additional costs. Engagement of team members in the process can also be monitored over time, even in near real time. A simple, typically binary metric gauging the current team environment can be set up. We'll discuss binary metrics later in the episode. Often people will tell us that the quality and timeliness of receipt of various process inputs is important to the performance of the process and its outputs. So let's look at those inputs. Ask, what input characteristics are important to the people performing the process? Metrics can be put in place to monitor these. These can include some measure of input quality, such as defects, or for information quality, a measure that we call completeness and accuracy. I can have incomplete information that can give rise to additional process time, effort, and cost as the information needed is gathered. I can also have information is not correct. This can have a similar effect on the process. A measure of delivery can also be helpful for process inputs. If I don't receive an input by a prescribed time, perhaps I can no longer meet the customer expectations, or can only do so with additional cost. The result of this discussion will be a nice set of process metrics. Processes to collect these at some frequency can then be developed. As we mentioned several times, there are two categories of metrics, outcome metrics and process metrics. They each have their purpose. Let's discuss this in more depth. Generally speaking, outcome metrics describe the outputs of a process from a safety, quality, delivery, cost, and even engagement standpoint. They are useful to identify trends over time and to assess the effects of process improvement efforts that have taken place. For example, if the focus on process improvement efforts was to positively affect customer satisfaction, we should be able to measure the results of our efforts over time. As I mentioned before, outcome metrics tend to be lagging indicators. Just how lagging, we will discuss shortly. Process metrics describe characteristics of a process that affects outcomes. These are useful to manage a process in near real time. The idea is if you manage to the process metrics, the proper outcomes will occur. Going a bit deeper, outcome metrics tend to be backward-looking and are usually calculated from other data. Let's consider an automobile example. Fuel mileage. You take a trip, determine the number of miles traveled, and the fuel consumed. You can now calculate average fuel mileage per gallon experienced during the trip. Now, I know many cars today provide this metric in more real time, but frankly, I haven't been able to determine how accurate it really is. Relating to this in the framework of SQDCE, let's start with safety. Outcome metrics can be the number of days lost, year to date, due to injury or accidents. Organizations often track the number of days since the last lost time, or some similar metric. Quality metrics such as yields, reject rates, scrap rates, return rates are commonly used. All required some calculation at the end of a period of time. The more frequent the calculation, the more useful the metric. Knowing what our reject rate was yesterday is more meaningful than what it was last week, in that it gives rise to more timely discussions. Delivery metrics, such as on-time delivery, on an order or line item basis are commonly used. But what is an equivalent in a project environment? How about percentage of tasks completed on time per a project schedule? Or perhaps percentage of services that met time-oriented service level agreements, or SLAs, as some people call them. Again, these are all calculated metrics at the end of a period of time. Cost metrics, such as average cost per unit or service delivered, are commonly used. However, the calculation can be a bit involved. What components of cost should be measured or should be included in the measure? In manufacturers, labor and material cost is tracked at some frequency. But what about overhead costs? Should they be included? Think about the purpose of such an outcome metric: to tell us how we are doing, quickly, clearly, and easily. We can see trends over time, both positive or negative. How actionable are overhead costs? How much do they really vary? The answer to these questions may determine whether particular overhead costs, if any, should be included. In a not-for-profit, the term financial stewardship might be more appropriate than costs. What are appropriate measures of such stewardship? Commonly used is some measure of compliance to a budget, often calculated monthly, a real lagging metric if it's monthly. But there may be others similar to for-profit institutions that can be calculated more currently. Engagement as an outcome metric usually focuses on customers. It's becoming more and more common. The ease of collecting the data has made it such. Follow-up surveys that can be quickly completed by customers are commonplace. Measuring customer satisfaction can take place on a daily basis now. Much better than annual surveys that many organizations did in the past. Most outcome metrics can be measured on a daily basis these days. The more timely the data, the more meaningful it is. As we stated before, process metrics are more real-time, and therefore more useful in managing processes not just day to day, but hour to hour, even more frequently. Many process metrics are single numbers and not calculated, making them easier to monitor. Back to our automobile example, think of the speedometer. Unless you are driving using cruise control on a highway, you will frequently check your speedometer to monitor your speed, which is the actual, and compare it to your local ordinances, the plan. It is also a known fact that it can affect fuel mileage. Manage your speed and you get better fuel mileage outcome. Using our SQDCE framework, let's think of possible process metrics that relate. For safety, observed unsafe behaviors is being used more commonly, particularly as people move more and more to behavioral safety. A rapid response to observing an unsafe behavior can be triggered. Why wait for the negative outcome of an injury, accident, or lost time? For quality, we have previously mentioned an information quality metric that we call completeness and accuracy. We can simply count the number of occurrences that we received information that was incomplete or inaccurate. The same can be said for any type of defect. The number and type of defect can give rise to a quick response to stop a process, contain the defect, and perhaps affect some other corrective action. Statistical control charts have been used in manufacturing and many service industries to monitor process performance in real or near real time, and to trigger a quick response to prevent negative outcomes such as non-conforming products or services. The key is to identify the proper process parameters to monitor. Many years ago, I worked with a healthcare organization to identify characteristics of a radiation treatment machine that would be monitored on a patient-by-patient basis, approximately 4 patients per hour per machine. Control charts were established to trigger machine adjustments and even maintenance protocols before very real negative outcomes occurred, such as administering improper treatments or even equipment breakdown. Delivery often takes the form of a service metric. Sticking with a healthcare example, studies exist that show the relationship between the time to perform various procedures and related outcomes, such as infection rates and other outcomes. Certainly, with these studies in hand, we should set up appropriate process metrics and use them to manage these procedures in a real-time or near real-time basis. Care must be given to service-related metrics and all metrics for that matter. Are they evoking the proper response decision-making, and action. I have worked with numerous call centers who had very questionable process metrics in place, such as on call time, where lower is better, number of calls processed, where more is better, and so on. The dysfunctional behaviors that these metrics gave rise to were astounding. We'll talk more about this later in the episode. As for engagement, we discussed some of the possibilities earlier. More and more, I am seeing organizations use a simple real-time indicator of the team's general attitude. By use of a happy face or frowny face, team members can indicate their pleasure or displeasure with how things are going. It is a form of binary metric and can trigger timely conversations to address current issues. No need to wait for the outcome metric of associated engagement that comes from a periodic survey to tell you when an issue exists. Simply have team members turn that frown upside down when they're satisfied with conditions in the workplace, or exhibit the frowny face if they're not pleased. These will trigger some important and timely conversations. Ideas for improvement identified by team members is a common metric relating to engagement. Not typically a real-time metric, the lack of ideas over a period of time can still be an early indicator of a lack of engagement. Time is relative, really, so such a metric is more timely than the aforementioned periodic survey. Let's use it. A frequently asked question is how to display the data. To answer that, we must understand that there are two types of data, variable and attribute. Variable data is measured, typically on a continuous scale. Time, dimensions, percentages are a few examples. They are best displayed over time, in the sequence that they occur. Therefore, trends or other patterns can be seen. Run charts are the most common form of chart used for variable data. Now, variable data can have attributes, which we'll define in a moment. Another frequently asked question is how much data to display? Over what period of time? The answer to this will vary based on the patterns that the data may reveal. There is definitely no one-size-fits-all. In highly repetitive environments, patterns can be seen in shorter time frames. Perhaps displaying a week's worth of data or 2 weeks is sufficient. Even in more repetitive environments, longer time frames may be desired. Monthly or quarterly patterns can then be seen. However, infrequently performed processes will most certainly need longer time frames to be displayed in order to show any patterns that may exist. In one organization, they established a standard of a rolling 2 weeks will be displayed on all charts. However, this gave rise to several issues. For example, a recruitment metric used in human resources tracked the average daily lead time to fill a position, calculated when positions were filled, and the data was displayed on a rolling 2-week basis. It was most definitely a lagging outcome metric, as the average time to fill a position was over 30 days. The organization was attempting to use it as a process metric to make more timely decisions. As an outcome metric, I asked to see the data over a course of a year. Lo and behold, a pattern could clearly be seen. There was an element of seasonality to the process that could not be seen on a rolling 2-week graph. Intuitively, everyone understood this. They just never saw the seasonality in any measurable and visible way, as they did on the run chart that was created. The new charts triggered important conversations on how to improve process performance going forward. My suggestion is to go about displaying the metric in different ways, to see what works best in a given situation. Apply the spirit of experimentation that is an integral part of PDCA to the development of the measurement system itself. Now let's discuss attribute data. An attribute is qualitative data that describes a characteristic that meets or does not meet a specification, quality or otherwise. It is best displayed for defined periods of time, a day, a week, a month. Comparisons are then made between periods in order to see how a process has changed, intentionally or unintentionally. The attributes are first characterized and then their frequency of occurrence counted during a period of time. Pareto charts are the most common form of attribute chart. One is shown here on the left. Categories of problems with orders are defined and listed at the bottom of the chart. The number of occurrences for each problem were counted over a period of time, day, week, month. A Pareto chart is formed by ranking the categories from those that occurred most frequently to least. Pareto charts can help prioritize their problem-solving and process improvement efforts. One would typically want to focus on the more frequently occurring problems. Once deliberate process changes were made, additional data can be collected and a new Pareto chart created. That can be compared to the original one to assess the output or the impact. Attribute data can be collected that relates to specific variable data to provide a more complete picture. For example, let's say we monitor the percentage of work that met an established standard on a daily basis using a run chart. We could also count the occurrences by reason when it did not meet the standard over a period of time. A Pareto chart could be created to accompany the run chart. This would provide a much fuller picture. Attribute data is a form of binary metric, good, bad, meet standard, or doesn't. Back to our automobile analogy. There are numerous binary metrics on a car dashboard. Trouble lights come on when a standard is not being met. One could track the number of times a light comes on by type over a period of time and create a Pareto chart. One could just have a simple visual indicator, think green/red, that shows if a standard is currently being met or not. A date of last occurrence could be added to provide a more complete picture. I often suggest such visual indicators, binary indicators, when I see run charts that appear to be flatlined. Trends or other patterns are not occurring. When the plan is based on an established standard, a standard that has been consistently met in the past, the gap between plan versus actual should trigger a problem-solving response. Something has unknowingly crept into the process that is causing it to perform at a less than desirable level. This is the classic definition of a problem, with a cause or causes that must be identified, addressed, so that the process returns to standard. A different type of gap involves goals or targets. Here, the gap is intentionally created in order to spark innovation in the form of process improvement. In either situation, the graph should clearly display the plan, the actual, the standard, or goal or target, so that any gap with actual is apparent. Then the appropriate discussions and follow-up can take place. Okay, we will wrap up the episode with a few additional tips. First, there is no one-size-fits-all when it comes to metrics. I gave a few examples of the issues that arise when attempts are made to standardize the look of all charts. It's about conveying data and information in the most effective way possible for a particular process, and not about making all the charts look the same. The repetition of different processes can vary significantly. Patterns can be specific to particular processes. These are just two of several very important reasons why one size just does not fit all. There is often excessive concern when developing process measurement systems with regard to quote-unquote getting it right. The fact is, you won't get it right at the very beginning. Most commonly is for the process measurement system to go through numerous iterations. Metrics will be discontinued, new ones added, charting techniques changed, and so on. So when will you know when you got it right? I always ask a series of questions about each metric. If people can describe recent decisions that have been made or actions that have been taken based on discussion stimulated by a particular metric, then it is providing benefit. It has a purpose. Now, on occasion, some metrics will be posted for strictly awareness purposes, but these should be the exception. As mentioned earlier in the episode, some data gathering will be done for study purposes only. By this I mean it will be collected for a limited time and analyzed. In such cases, this purpose must be clear to all involved so there is no misunderstanding. People will strongly resist such a metric if they believe it to be an ongoing process management metric. By extension, they may question the entire measurement system. Our last tip involves creating the right environment for the process management system to flourish. Strong emotional responses will occur to such systems, particularly if they represent a marked difference from past practice. Existing significant issues of trust can become worse, not better. Modest issues of trust can be overcome with the visibility and transparency that comes with process measurement systems. However, that will depend on the response of leadership to what the system conveys. This could be the most important tip provided. What has been the historic management response to problems or less than expected process performance? If the response has been some form of shoot the messenger, then this will be a significant hurdle to overcome. Lean leaders celebrate the gap, since they represent opportunities to improve. Blame and shame responses will give rise to resistance and even stronger negative responses. For that reason, it is important for leaders to understand their role in the success of the process measurement system. Their response can make or break the system. That brings the episode to a close. To summarize the key points made, metrics are used throughout each stage of the PDCA process. Second, consider the use of SIPOC to identify process and outcome metrics. I have found SIPOC to be very helpful when developing process measurement systems. 3, graphically display metrics in order to see patterns. Numbers alone are insufficient. The graphical display of metrics allows for patterns of various forms to be seen and important learning to be had. 4, there is no one-size-fits-all. Setting standards for standard's sake is never a good approach. This applies to process measurement systems as well. And 5, leaders must create the proper environment. This final tip is arguably the most important and should be considered at the outset of the development of the system. I hope that you have found the information provided helpful. Process measurement is a very important topic for anyone or any organization practicing continuous improvement. As has often been said, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Goodbye.